What's up, everyone? Ryan from Oakland Ghosts, and two of the most common questions or comments that I get kind of on my videos and my channels are, one, how does the Synthstrom Deluge kind of fit into a larger DAWless setup? Like, how do I use it? How does it fit in, right? And then the second question I get a lot is how I approach arranging electronic music, particularly for kind of more abstract or what I call asymmetrical compositions. And then lastly, especially when I'm working on really weird songs, after I release them, I'll get a lot of questions about if I could do a breakdown and how I went about creating those patches or how I created those sequences to get those effects and things like that. And this current piece that I'm working on just kind of felt like the perfect gateway to kind of touch on all of those things. So that's what we're going to do today, specifically with a pretty heavy focus on how the Deluge really lends itself well to asymmetrical composition. I guess kind of first what I should do is kind of define what I mean by asymmetrical composition. I don't know if that's a common term. I don't know if I made it up. I might have made it up. But really, what I'm saying by asymmetrical composition is that, I come from the indie alternative kind of rock scene. And so to me, a traditional composition, is verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, the typical formula, right? Like there's a formula and a pattern that the composition follows. And so an asymmetrical composition in my head would be the opposite of that, like a more experimental composition that doesn't really follow the traditional rules. Electronic music in general, even something like techno, I would say is a little asymmetrical. It doesn't typically have a verse chorus structure. In fact, it's a little more heavily focused on repetition and almost hypnotic, right? Seeing how long you can really milk a loop before you kind of get tired of it really is what a lot of electronic music is. But what I'm thinking about specifically when I say asymmetrical composition is probably more in the ambient realm. And the way I kind of think about these are like if indie song or a pop song, like a traditional song you might hear on the radio or something like that, is, if I relate it to like fine art, right? That would be like a still life or a portrait or something like that. It's a song that tells a story. It's a picture that tells a story. Whereas an asymmetrical or ambient type song, I think of that as more like an abstract painting. Maybe abstract composition is a better thing to say. But I think of it more like an abstract painting where it doesn't necessarily tell a story as much as it's meant to create a mood. It's meant to make you feel a certain way without telling you specifically what that is. Does that make sense? And I actually think in a lot of cases, one of the things I don't love about a lot of ambient music is that it doesn't tell a story. I don't mind so much that the composition, the structure of the arrangement is, a little more abstract. But I think a lot of times it's so heavily focused on just creating mood that you forget to tell a story. And I am much more interested, it's probably just because that's the kind of music I was brought up in telling a story. It doesn't need to be with words, but I want to take you on a journey. I want to guide you through a thing. And I think there's room for telling a story in ambient music. You can still have an abstract composition, but still guide the listener and take them on a journey. So anyway, that's what I mean by asymmetrical composition. It's not a traditional composition. And the Deluge actually lends itself very, very well to this style of music. So let's jump over there. I think what we're going to do is I'm going to start on the Deluge. I'll play a snippet of the composition that I'm working on right now. And then I'll kind of just go through the different tracks and I'll explain how I set them up the way that I set them. I probably won't do an in-depth patch breakdown. That's not really what this video is about, I don't think. I'll touch on a little bit at the very end. If we have time, I'll go back and I'll show you how I patched up the different synths. But it's more of a focus on how I'm using the Deluge to sequence those things. And then also how you go about arranging something that's a little more just weird. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. Let's dive in. Okay, so this piece I'm working on right now, I just felt like was a really good example of what I'm talking about by asymmetrical composition or abstract composition, and how the Deluge is really a primary driver of enabling me to kind of create that pretty much all the sounds that you're going to hear, other than drums and a couple of synths that I created, are outboard. They're all being done on all my various hardware synths. And while a lot of those patches I think are actually pretty complex and pretty interesting, it's really the Deluge that kind of fits into my master setup and allows me to create this type of song. And it just felt like a good opportunity to show you some of the unique features, I think, of the Deluge sequencer that really allow me to do this. So we're going to focus mostly on the Deluge. Maybe in a later video, if you guys really want, I can go and, leave me a comment. I can do patch breakdowns and stuff like that. I've actually done one for the Mother 32, which I'll link up in the corner. And that's kind of the main interesting patch anyway. So since we're going to focus mostly on the Deluge and how that sequencer enables this song to happen, let's start with just listening really quick to a snippet, and then we'll discuss what's going on in the various sequences to kind of make this all gel and work together as a core loop. In general, what I mean by a core loop, one of the ideas I'm most interested in electronic music is kind of coming up with what I call a core loop, which is really just kind of the central groove. It's one idea that basically ties the whole song together. It's the meat. And what I'm very interested in, especially again coming from the indie and rock kind of world, is not having to do chord changes so much, but coming up with a core idea that could drive a whole song and milking it. Like, how can I make this evolve over time, whether that's changing the timbre, whether that's introducing other parts, etc., to really kind of build a broader idea instead of relying on changing to a B part, if that makes sense. So this is the core loop. This is kind of everything turned on. I wouldn't normally play everything stacked like this at once, except maybe in the climax of the song or something like that. This is kind of the point I get to when I decide, all right, I have enough pieces that I can build a composition and an arrangement around. So I'll just play that for you really quick. Let me just fade up some of my drones. I have a couple of drones going on some of my other synths. All right, here we go. So there you go. That's kind of the beef. That's the meat of the track. And there's a lot of things going on. One of the things, like I said, that I struggle with when I'm listening to ambient music is I feel like it just gets boring after a while. I like the mood that it creates, but it doesn't feel like it takes me anywhere. It feels like cool background noise a lot of times. And with my songs, I do like to tell a story. And one of the ways you have to achieve that is by generating interest and finding ways to generate interest even in a simple loop. Like, that's a pretty long loop. So let's start there. Why not? Let me go to blue mode, or let's turn some of these things off. So this song, like I said, started with a loop that I created on the Mother 32. And that is this guy here. So there's a couple things going on with my Mother 32. First of all, there's just a background drone. If I just turn it on, you can hear the drone. And the way I'm doing that is I'm basically playing the LFO. I have it going in audio rate, and then I've tuned it to the root of the song. And so that's going on one side. And then on the other side, I have this melody that I've created. And what I wanted to do, well, one, I wanted to challenge myself to be able to do more than one thing on the Mother 32. The Mother 32, the Moog Mother 32, if you don't know, it's a single oscillator synth. So I wanted to see how far I could push that. So getting a drone and getting a melody was kind of a complicated patch. The first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that the kind of core of the song was long, that there was a long piece, but that it wasn't a typical like 4-bar loop or 8-bar loop. So the core loop, the idea is because it has both the drone and it has that melodic part, what I wanted to do for the melodic part was have it kind of an odd time signature. So instead of like a typical 4-bar or 8-bar loop, it's actually a 10-bar loop. And if I really dig in, it's actually broken a little more. It's actually kind of a 3-bar loop, then 2 bars of nothing, and then 3 bars, and then 2 bars. So like here's a first bar, we can play along with it. Let's just follow it. So that's the second bar, 3 bars, and then it'll just kind of drone for 2. One bar, 2 bar, 3 bars. Okay, so this one, the resolution one's actually a 4-bar loop, and then another bar of silence. And part of the idea with this is I want to try to create polymeters. And so by creating kind of an odd signature, what I'm going to do is, first of all, since I have those kind of gaps built in, I'm going to create loops that fill those gaps. But then I also want to create other loops like the bass line. Let's go check out the bass line actually. So here's the bass line. Let's turn it on first of all so we can hear them together. Then we'll go in. Okay, so the bass line is a single bar, or maybe you can call it a 2-bar. I don't know, but it's not on the 5 pattern at all. It's something that's going to loop, and it's going to loop at different points because of the way that the other part works. So let's play them again. And that's just going to play constantly throughout the whole thing. It's just going to loop. And you know, actually the subharmonicon is doing a similar thing. It's just kind of an arpeggio that plays underneath at a very simple, a very basic loop. 1 bar. And what that's going to do with this part, what that's going to do is, I think that's going to kind of ground the listener. When you have something that's a little more abstract, I think it's important to have at least one part that is focused that the listener can kind of attach to. And that's kind of what the bass is doing on this one. In addition, when I get into the drums, why don't we hop over there? So, God, I'm just not comfortable in grid mode, but it's easier for presentation's sake. So the first part of my drums is just a very simple kick, and I wanted drums to not be the focus of this. Again, coming from the rock indie world, I'm very heavily drum focused. I have to have drums in my songs, and this song I actually tried not to have any drums, and I couldn't do it, but I still wanted them to be devalued and not the focal point. So the first thing I did, these are kind of some plastic tub samples, and I just wanted to kind of create a heartbeat. Now this drum loop is a 4-bar loop with only the first bar having anything happen. It's just, like I said, like a heartbeat thing. So let's take a listen to all of that really quick. Let's bring them back up. And that's it. The next piece that we added was actually this, and I got some cool, this is again a 4-bar loop, but I humanized it, and there is some randomness in which notes will play, and that's kind of acts as like my hat, or you know, it's just some kind of rhythmic thing to kind of draw your attention, something that you can latch onto that'll loop around and keep you going. And then the last piece of the drums, this is where we got pretty weird actually. This one's actually a 3-bar loop. So 1, 2, 3. You can see 1, and each pattern's different. So what's going to happen is that's going to create a polymeter where these don't happen the same way every time, but it still feels familiar. So hopefully what that does is it gives the listener a chance to latch on to something that they think is familiar and that they think that they can predict, but it changes enough to keep it interesting and makes it a little more difficult to tell where the loop starts or ends. So what I'm doing is on this first bar, these play every time. This one, all of these are randomized, so I don't know when one of these notes is going to play. So on the second bar, it's always going to be different no matter what out of the bat, because I've programmed in some random probability, which you do by holding it down and turning, like you can see, this one's 85% chance, this one's at a 55, 45, 60, right? So every one of these has a different chance of playing. So this pattern on the second bar that it goes through this is going to be different every time. And then similarly on this one, I have a little bit of randomness programmed into here, at least on this one, I believe. Let me check. No. Okay, now these ones are going to be the same every time. But again, because it's 3 bars and it doesn't line up to the way the rest of the patterns are playing, it's going to shift where these things happen every time. And because the second bar is completely randomized, it's just going to create some differences, even though it feels familiar. And I think that generates a little more interest. It allows the listener to kind of listen to this long loop for a longer period of time. Let's stop for a sec there. So that's one trick that I'm using with the Deluge, and this is what I love about the sequencer is because you can control the different sequence lengths, and because you can add probability like iteration probability or random probability, it gives you the opportunity, even when you have a very simple kind of core loop, to add interest that expands on it before you're even focused on arrangement and taking things away and adding things. These other 2 parts, we can probably put them both on. So these are both 5-bar patterns, but they only play on the 4. So let's hop in. And the 4, you'll remember, is the kind of gap on the Mother 32. So you can see we got 1, 2, 3, 4 is where it hits, right? And both of these kind of do the same thing. One is kind of a bass swell, and one is, I created it on the GS Music Brie 6. It's a chord swell, and it just kind of fills in that gap where the Mother 32 dips out. So here, let's throw those all together for a second. Here we go. Just adds a little interest. It just gives something to kind of happen in that spot. Right? Pretty cool. And similarly, this pattern, this is from the Rust pack that Rephaser made. It's called Ambient Wind. Really cool patch. This is just a little melodic pattern that kind of bridges the gap between those parts. So I've got the Mother 32 melody playing a thing, and then this thing kind of at the tail end of it kind of bridges into that chord swell. It's a really subtle effect, but it just kind of bridges the gap between one melody. Really, really subtle. And I have some randomized panning going on so that it goes in different places in the stereo field too. And that just kind of bridges that gap, like I said. We can turn that off. So those are all those pieces. And now the last 2 pieces, these ones are a little more crazy. Let's focus on this one first. This is going to the Pittsburgh Modular Taiga. And what I have happening here is I've created a semi-generative sequence. So the last piece of the puzzle, the rest of this thing is all, even though I have different polymeters going on and I have different rhythms that make it a little more difficult to identify where the loop starts and ends, it's still a loop. Eventually, you're probably going to get tired of it if I just played it forever. I mean, I won't get tired of it. I've listened to this thing for hours, but the average listener probably will, right? What this is creating a generative kind of higher end melody, and I never know what it's going to create. I programmed in the notes that it could select, but because I programmed in randomness, probability, as well as altered the length of each track, I don't know when it's going to play. And let me show you what I mean. So here, we can focus on just that one for a minute. I've programmed in the notes that I know are going to sound good and create an interesting melody. But what I've done on each of these notes is I have introduced probability, right? I don't know when they're going to hit. It's going to be different every time. Each one's different. In addition to that, I have it playing in ping pong. So it's going to go through the sequence and then back through the sequence. And as you can see by these, each one of these notes that I've programmed in, I've varied the length almost randomly of how long they are. So some are shorter, some are longer. What that's going to do is after it goes once through the sequence, it's going to start coming back. it's going to play things in random places. These things aren't going to hit on the 1 or on the 2. They could hit anywhere, and I don't know where they're going to hit because I've programmed that randomness in. I'll show you what I mean. Now, right now, I played all of them. Very rare. I have the probability set usually between the 60 and 40 range on a lot of these, but as you can see, now they're starting to diverge. So these are the playheads for all the various different things. And it has a chance to trigger when it goes this way, and a chance to trigger when it goes back the other way. And the longer this plays, the more varied it's going to get, the more out of place it's going to get. But because I've programmed in notes that I know that work with the key of the song, it's just going to feel like I'm kind of jazzy, intentionally playing a melody. But I never know what melody this thing's going to create. And that just adds kind of an extra layer on top of everything when you throw it together on the core loop. Let's do that again one more time. Let's get my drones up, and here we go. So again, what that kind of melody is doing is it's just adding little sparkles of interest, like right there. I never know where they're going to happen, and that does a couple of things. One, it keeps it more interesting for the listener. It feels intentional, I think, but you don't know where it makes you kind of forget where the loop's restarting and beginning, because there is no loop to it. And for me as a performer, because this song is equal parts performance, I play the filters quite a bit on all the different instruments, as well as delays and stuff like that. It's a lot of knob turning performance on my outboard synths. This melody, what it gives me is something to play off, because this song's all about feeling. It's about when I'm going to swell this in or when I'm going to swell that out, when I'm going to turn to the drone instead of the melody, when I'm going to create some wind, all those kind of things. And playing off that random generative sequence gives me an opportunity to create a performance. And that performance will be different every single time I perform this. So it's about kind of locking into that final performance. Really cool trick, especially in ambient, is having at least one part that's kind of semi-generative that you can bring in. Now, the last thing that I've done, this one was super fun. This is a synth that I made by myself. It's my own synth, and I'll show you how we made it. There's nothing like particularly special, but so it's a pretty standard. It's 2 bars. So the first bar plays this pattern, the second bar plays the same pattern. The only thing that's different is this little section here, this kind of refrain. I have randomized that, and it's latched. So what that means is it has a random chance of playing 25, but they're all latched. So what that means is 25% of playing these 3 notes in sequence. So it's saying that if this note plays, these notes will also play. But I never know when it's going to happen. And this patch is called Music Box. I'll show you why in a minute. It's pretty obvious. Let me turn off the subharmonicon. So sometimes it plays that little tag at the end. Sometimes it doesn't. I never really know. So this was really fun to make because it's this little music box magnet that I brought back from Germany. You can listen to it. See if we can get. So all I did was I had this unplugged. I used the mic to sample this directly into one of the oscillators. And then I built a synth out of it. I built a synth and now I could play it. I tuned it up and I could play it all across the pattern. I am running it through some effects, obviously. I've mangled it quite a bit, but it's just a music box. It's really, and it just adds a little sparkle that I could bring in and out of the song. I don't play, when I perform this, I don't play it often with the whole thing. It's kind of a special thing that I'll bring in and out, but here's what it sounds like when everything's going all together. One more time. So that's the meat of the song. And I think when you're going about trying to create this kind of style of a composition, this kind of more out there abstract kind of composition, the key thing, and the reason the Deluge is so helpful in this, is even though you have that core loop, it's creating ways that generate interest over the course of that loop that change, so that you don't get too latched on to it being a loop. But also you have to make that main groove be meditative enough that it makes people kind of zone into it, right? So again, like having a thing like the main melody on the Mother 32 and the bass that's repetitive and keeps going over and over and over, that gives the listener something to latch onto when there's these other elements that are a little more abstract. Now, the difficulty that I had when I got to arrangement is I really love the arranger on the Deluge. That's one of my favorite features because as you can see, it's very visual. These are all my separate tracks. These are the loops and they're the length of the loop. It's very visual like a DAW is. It's just laid out like a DAW. I have my tracks. These are where the loops start. These are where the loops stop. It just makes sense to me. It's really logical. In a song like this, it's difficult because the loops don't start and end on the same place. I mean, like we can see, like my snare is a 3-bar loop. The kicks are not. I'm looping them out quite a bit, but everything's kind of a different polymeter length. And this song is really, really dependent on feel. So it's about capturing the performance. So initially my thought and my feeling was what I'm going to have to do is perform this song. So I went in grid mode, and it's about turning things on, turning things off, playing and doing like a full-on improv kind of performance. The wall that I ran up against with that, however, is I have some things going on with some of my synths, like the bass line and the subharmonicon are using a LFO to kind of kick in that gap, that little gap where the swells happen. I want the cutoff to kind of raise, but I have to manually put that in. It's not a tempo synced LFO. So I had to find the spot, and then I have to like eyeball it on when to start and end. And so if I mess up in the performance, there's a lot of restructuring. The other problem that I'm having is with the Deluge in particular, the way that it selects loops. If you're doing something that's on a typical, things start on a downbeat, that's kind of how it cues things, right? But because some of my loops are 3-bar loops or 2-bar loops or 5-bar loops, if you cue multiple things at the same time, I think it kind of chooses depending on which one you pick first or last. I don't really know, but it can cue things in the wrong spot. And then everything kind of gets off, like trying to fill those gaps with the swells, for example. And I was kind of struggling with that as well. The last thing was I kind of found, because the song's so meditative, that when I was just jamming and trying to kind of jam out a performance, I just kind of started doing the same things over and over and over again. And usually that's kind of a cue that I've kind of figured out an arrangement, but I didn't feel they were altogether that interesting. So I knew that actually I was going to have to use the arranger on this. And the way that I went about it was I recorded a performance from grid mode. So I did a performance. I recorded that performance. You do that by holding, I believe it's record, and you do, I think it's song to record. I forget offhand, but I think what you do is you hold song and then push record, and then basically your performance will get printed over into Arranger, and I used that as a base. So that was okay. That was pretty close. I almost nailed that one, and it laid all these things kind of automatically in here for me to look at that performance. And then I could go in and I could be like, you know what, actually, I want it to start a little bit later, or I don't want the drums to start there. It just gave me a base to build on. And then there was a lot of back and forth kind of between doing a performance and being like, okay, did that feel right? Is that where this should come in? Is that where that should come out? It was just a lot of back and forth. But ultimately, it was the arranger that kind of saved the thing. And the reason, again, that I love the Deluge and the reason it worked for this kind of song is because once it gave me a kind of solid foundation, a framework of what the song was going to be, I could focus on the performance and I could practice it and I could repeat it more or less. Obviously, there's some generative elements going on, but I could more or less kind of lock down, okay, this is when I'm going to turn here, this is when I'm going to turn there, and not have to worry about cueing various things. I could focus on just the knob twisting that happened with the rest of the song. That's the beauty of the Deluge. That's what I love about this thing. So to answer that question about how does it fit into a bigger system, a bigger, DAWless setup, for me, it allows me to create pretty complex songs. And because I can arrange the whole thing and not have to worry about cueing things on bigger songs that are a little weird and abstract, I can just focus on the performance of the rest of the thing and know that it's going to play the song the way that I want it to be performed. Very, very cool. And also, it's always my key drum machine. It was my sampler for that music box patch. I added some additional synths, and just the abilities of the sequencer to do random and iterative programming is just really cool. So that's why I love the Deluge. That's why it's the brains of my setup. Even though when you watch some of my videos, it might seem like it's just kind of in the background in the corner, it's really kind of doing everything. It's just allowing me the freedom to do more performative stuff with the rest of my gear. So there you go. That's how I use the Deluge to kind of compose more asymmetrical, abstract compositions. I hope that made sense. I hope it was interesting. I'm just going to play some of this in the background, and we'll kind of call it a day. I think that's good. If you found this helpful, if you found it at least interesting or engaging, consider subscribing. It's a really big help to the channel. We appreciate you guys to no end. Thanks so much for sticking with me. I'll catch you on the next time. Right now.